meet my bride. Let's go for a ride in my newfangled automobile. Just where we will go, nobody knows, but it's sure a great way to feel. Behind the wheel of the speed meter steel, it's my newfangled automobile. Hello and welcome to Vintage Car History. I'm Wild Bill. It is true that the vast majority of vintage car makes have long since gone out of production. Some of the companies were established to make cars, while others were existing firms making something else and turned to automobile manufacturing, but most did not endure. A few of them do still exist, Peugeot, Rolls-Royce, and Ford being some notable examples. Yet there is one make of vintage car, one of the great makes, that came from a Cleveland corporation that was always evolving, and though they no longer make cars, is still in business today. We are, of course, speaking of the Peerless Motor Car Company. Businesses have founders. Some are established by engineers, others by bean counters, and even more are founded by two or more folks that combine their skills for success formula. However, it is fair to say that Peerless was founded by the city of Cleveland. Not in the sense that it was a company owned by the city government, but rather that Cleveland of the late 19th century was a breeding ground for commerce, and Peerless was a product of that environment. Cleveland was a hot spot for manufacturing and technology industries at the time. A natural harbor along the Great Lakes had been expanded, and Cleveland could both ship and receive raw materials and goods on a large scale. The available labor force was large, and the city was integrated into the railroad network as well. Investors, bankers, and inventors flocked to Cleveland to make their fortunes, and in some cases just to make a quick buck and move on. In either case, the environment was ripe with opportunity. It was in this environment that Peerless was established. It began in 1889 when a group of investors created a new manufacturing company in Cleveland, the Peerless Wringer and Manufacturing Company. The idea was to use vulcanized rubber instead of traditional wooden spools to squeeze the water out of just washed clothes. The directors gathered the needed employees to make it happen, and production began, and the product was a success. Another investor group saw this success and suggested a merger. The Mercantile Manufacturing Company, also in Cleveland, had larger facilities and could themselves do much of the iron casting needed. So in 1892, the two companies came together and became the Peerless Manufacturing Company. Armed with increased output of product, the firm grew quickly and by 1895 had outgrown their old combined factories and moved to a 2-acre facility near downtown. Armed with a lot more space, the board of directors decided to expand their product offering and tooled up to also build bicycles. Peerless bikes were well designed and well made, and they sold like crazy. Their engineers came up with improvements to the coaster brake system, and French cyclists were particularly enthusiastic about them. Peerless bicycles sold well there as well as in England and Germany. By 1900, Peerless was amongst the largest bicycle manufacturers in the USA. It was also in 1900 that Peerless once again changes production. Automobiles were becoming a thing, and another company in town, Winton, was cashing in, and the boys at Peerless wanted some of that action. They reorganized into the Peerless Motor Car Company and in the same year produced their first car, the Type C Motorette. It used a De Dion Bouton single-cylinder engine of 5 horsepower and was a fairly basic car. Whether you used the term voiture or light car or runabout, cars like these were the compact economy commuter cars of their day. But Peerless wouldn't be making little cars for long. They hired a new chief engineer, a Mr. Louis Morse, to design powerful and race-winning cars. Morse got to work, and under his guidance, Peerless brought most of their production in-house, including casting their own engines of his design. By 1903, Peerless cars would prove to be the standard of American design. Powerful engines, 3-speed pinion transmission, and a drive shaft to the rear differential, but they were just getting started. The boys at Peerless reached out to the man who was, at the time, the most famous race car driver in the USA, Barney Oldfield. They made him a great offer. They'd design and build for him the ultimate race car and pay him to drive it. In return, he'd win races in their car, and thus both Oldfield and Peerless would benefit from the publicity. The car they built for him in 1904 became famously known as the Green Dragon. T had four-cylinder engine of 35 horsepower that also sported an oil pump, thus allowing pressurized engine lubrication, important to survive running for long periods. 3-speed tranny, shaft drive, drum brakes to the rear, and a low-slung chassis. Oldfield took this car onto the track and set records, won races, and made Peerless a car to desire. At the same time, Peerless began to use what they learned on the track to make luxury cars and limousines, which would be their mainstay for the rest of the company's car manufacturing career. For the first quarter of the 20th century, Peerless would be counted amongst the most prestigious and sought-after luxury cars in America and even abroad. Unfortunately, they were one of the luxury car makes that did not survive the Depression, ceasing car manufacture in 1931. They merged with a Canadian company in 1933 and retooled their Cleveland factory into a brewery. Oh, we'll see more of Peerless in the future, but for now, know that this merged company still exists. And if you'd like to drink a toast to vintage cars, just grab a pint of Carling's Black Label and know that your mug of ale was once one of the greatest vintage cars in the world. Thanks for watching Vintage Car History, and we'll see you next week. Peace.